Okay, thank you, Dirk, for the nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, to be invited at this discussion because I do sincerely think that it's at the heart of looking this discussion of... in fact, on the first slide, I have already my conclusion. Conclusion is that we really need urgently to set up a circular economy within a context of sustainable development in Europe. And I will showcase it through a study we have been making for the metal sector. And first, let me echo what has been said by Martin Charter just before coffee break. I do think that we need to know that out there, outside this meeting, there is a vast majority of stakeholders, and they don't have a clue on what's going on bottom up, but also what is going on at the global level. If I talk to hundreds of SME managers, CEOs, for example, for the local Chamber of Commerce, then afterwards in the really that they are not aware of what is happening. And the same goes as well for trade unions and their members. And that's the reason why I do think that the study I will present, we have made it together. I say we because Sander is with me here, our economist. We have made it at the Institute for Sustainable Development in Bruges for one of the big trade unions in our region in Belgium. And in fact, from their side, it was meant to empower the delegates, the representatives of the trade union in the enterprise to push as well, let's say from the bottom in the enterprise, to push and get into a dialogue with the employer. And it's quite interesting to see what the assignment was. In fact, it started all 2 years ago in the summer of 2012 when they were thinking about the consequences of the closing down of the Ford factories in Genk, where you might know that within 1 week now, almost 10,000 people will be unemployed because of this decision by a big multinational. And for them, for the top of the ABVV Metaal, which is this trade union of the metal sector in Flanders, one of the big ones, for them, kind of starting a trigger to reflect on reindustrialization, but in a sustainable way. That is what you see there. And the second part is interesting as well. They acknowledge that in the long term, we need system innovation. And they acknowledge, the top of this trade union acknowledges, that is what you can read at the bottom, that both government and enterprises are focusing on the short term. So an interesting debate, I think, for them to enter the debate, to take up responsibility. We have published a study in Dutch of almost 200 pages and also a summary in Dutch and French. If you master French, then maybe you can have a look into the details through the summary. And in fact, on the content, we have 4 major parts in this study. One, you have the global challenges and what are the influences in our country and our region. 2, what is the current state of the metal sector in our region? And 3, try to bring these two together, the global challenges together with the influence on the metal sector in our region, and what does that mean? And then 4, come forward with practical approach, with actions formulated, suggested in the report. There are several annexes, but I point to 2 of them. One annex was really looking at the individual metals and the security of supply, and 2, looking also at some regions in our country, the region of Bruges and the region of Limburg, and to see what is maybe the vulnerability at the local level when we talk about local employment. So that is in there in the report. Talking about the metal sector doesn't exist. If you are a bit aware about the NASIC code, the nomenclatura we are using at the European level, then you can see that we have a list of divisions, starting from the manufacture of basic metals, going up to the manufacture of other transport equipment. So the metal sector doesn't exist. We needed to look into the details and to see what is going on in our region. In my contribution, I've prepared in a couple of points. I will run quickly through it so that I stick to the time allocated. First, let me start with the so-called mega forces. In fact, indeed, I guess that a couple of years ago, we were looking at climate change, and others were maybe looking at biodiversity. And we have a group in Paris, for example, looking at the energy issues, and then maybe others were looking at deforestation, and we have other people looking at population growth, etc. What you see, what you can observe, is that only the last couple of years in academia, in international panels, they are trying to look at the linkages between the mega forces. There are different publications, and I will withdraw from one publication, but I think it's representative for other publications as well. First of all, we have three big drivers in the world. Population growth for sure, the mega cities, tens of millions of people living in one city, and also the welfare of the middle class in the emerging countries. Think about China, Brazil, India, etc. These are the drivers for increasing demand at the global level of energy and fuel, and also from there, a contribution to climate change. And also asking for more resources, asking for more water, and then from there, you get indeed issues on food security, on degradation of ecosystems, and on deforestation. The point is that this is coming from KPMG, and I know if we talk about KPMG, we might say, yeah, what are we talking about? But interesting there is that the report was made by Ivo de Boer, who was for a long time the head of the Climate Change Secretariat in Bonn, and who left in the meantime KPMG as well. I think he is now busy with green growth and at the global level. But they were looking at 60 different mega forces, and they summarized it to 10. Like I said, in other publications you have a similar list. But the point is that apart from the drivers, the three drivers I'm mentioning, population growth, the mega cities, and then the increase of the welfare of this middle class, that we all together also said, yeah, we need to do something about climate change. And what we said, okay, let's green the supply. Let's look for a low-carbon society. Well, if you look into the details, we are putting a pressure on resources. We are asking for the same resources we need in the classical technologies, smartphones, laptops, etc. We are looking for the same resources we need as well in the renewable energy, for example, rare earth metals, biomass, and so on. So that is causing a problem, and you can see that in the prices. This is a report of Chapman House in London I'm quoting, where you can see a hockey stick, where food, fuel, and the metal prices are going up in the last 10 years. Yes, there were volatile going up and down, but in the last 10 years, they are really going up. And that is worrying as well different institutions in the world. Now, we are not only referring to what is happening at the international level, for example, the report of KPMG, but only yesterday, in the Parliament of Flanders, this report was presented, where they were looking as well to mega trends, they are calling it, and then to the influence in our region. And they come more or less to the same conclusions. From there, going to the metal sector in our country, probably also in other countries, we have a vulnerability in terms of looking for resources. And the research we have been doing was discussed in a working group from trade union representatives. And even these employees were reporting on the problem of resources in the metal sector, in looking for resources to have the operations going on. So it's a real question. And when we were drafting the report, we were putting in the report war on metals ? in the final report, because of new data available, we have been drafting more on metals rotation. So there is an issue at the global level. Let's have a look why we have this problem. If you look at technology and clean technology, I mean, we cannot deny the performance has increased. But the performance has increased because of using a huge diversity of metals. This is the periodic system. Maybe you will remember it from secondary school, for example. But when my father, for example, was a teacher on electricity and electronics in the 80s, beginning of the 90s, then he was explaining to his pupils, to his students, well, a printing board, for example, therefore you need maybe 10 to 15 different types of metals. Nowadays, it goes up to 60 elements in a printing board of a technology, of a clean technology. And that's the reason why we have a good performance of this technology. But the problem is as well that the recycling rate of these elements is quite low at the global level, and even for some of them in Belgium. Red is -1%. So there is a real problem. That's the reason also why you see the Rohstofallianz, for example, in Germany, where the employers are making deals even with the NATO to secure supply. That's the reason why you see other actors on the market, the rare metal brokers, where they are telling the story, well, don't invest in real economy, but try to have some speculation and you put your money in buying rare earth metals because you can have benefits from it. Also, for sure, we have all the publications from the European Commission pointing at the geopolitical context of this. Some of the metals, of the elements, are in the hands of only a few countries. And then you see pictures like this or articles like this, where you see that this problematic issue, in fact, is hindering even the development of green technology. So there is, if I may summarize it like this, there is a war on metals going on. And for sure, there are more classical vulnerability issues to enterprises, that's for sure. But we have called it in the report a specific vulnerability in terms of energy and in terms of raw material supply. Perhaps not in the enterprise itself, but maybe in the value chain somewhere, upstream in the life cycle of the product, downstream in the life cycle of the product. What is interesting as well is looking at what does that mean now for the metal sector in terms of a SWOT analysis. We have used the methodology developed by the Resource Institute in Washington, World Resource Institute in Washington, and then we have used the results and compare it with the SWOT analysis made by Econopolis. For those who are from Belgium, and when I mention the name Geert Noes, then you know what is Econopolis. Well, let's just have a look at what the differences are between the two SWOT analyses. Econopolis is still saying, yeah, indeed, we need to do something about the industrialization, but is discussing it at the global level. It's still pushing forward globalization. From our perspective, our conclusion, I will come to that later on again, we need a re-industrialization, an industrialization at the continental level. So at the continent of Europe. Econopolis thinks that multinationals are important. We have our doubts, because decision-making is not in the country, is sometimes not in Europe. And where the money goes floating around, well, the question is, do they really care about, for example, a circular economy? In terms of the weaknesses, well, let's be brief. We have for all stakeholders a problem that there is a vertical compartmentalization. Think about the employers' associations linked to sectors. Think about the trade unions linked to sectors. And that is hindering, I think, transition towards sustainable development, transition towards a circular economy. In terms of opportunity, I will come to that. I will come back to that later on. But there is still a tension between those who are pleading for green economy, and let's say we are pleading for a circular economy, and we need to be well aware of that. And it was discussed before in the questions on the 3D printing. Be aware as well on the trade-offs and the rebound effects, because I think we have a big issue over there we need to resolve. In terms of threats, well, I mentioned only one. Yes, indeed, we need to follow up with schooling, with education. The question is schooling for what? For a circular economy or for a throughput economy? So that is, again, a debate we need to follow up. So the conclusion was already that I said we need to go for a circular economy. I will take the same source, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but we have translated it into Dutch, and we have split it up. Because in fact, yes, we have now this throughput economy, and we need two wings. We need a wing looking at the biomass, the biological materials, and we need a wing looking at the minerals, at the metals within this context of a circular economy. And I acknowledge the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and this is the English version. Now, taking into account those global challenges where there is an increasing demand for biomass at the global level, the question is, do we create space in our country, in our region for biomass? That's the question, and we heard before Greg, for example, some examples. But the second question is as well, for the other wing, on minerals and metals, do we have really time for maintenance, for reuse, for innovation, for all the details we need? It was mentioned the repair cafes. Allow me some critical remarks on the repair cafes. These are a kind of pop-up restaurants. They are not really in place at a short distance where you can go each 2 weeks, for example, in a city. So that's still a problem. We need to get more professional approach from the repair cafes. Now, in this detailing the circular economy, and I agree with Martin Charter that we need really to detail. We have different issues to tackle, etc. Now, one is the following one we have been putting forward related to this closing down of the Ford factories. We have an old technology. I call it an old technology, shredding. You have an old car, you put it in the shredding machine, and then we say, hooray, we have 93% of the car recycled. Well, two remarks. We have only 50% of the total number of old cars that we are shredding in our country. The rest is going via export to Africa, for example. Secondly, I'm interested in the 7% we are not recycling, because in there you have these elements you need for good performance of technology. So therefore, why can't we reverse the belt of a Ford? And the meticulous way we are building a car, trying to dismantle the car in the same meticulous way. But that means that you have some prerequisites. You need design for scarcity and recycling for scarcity. And that, we can debate that later on, but that's still a problem. I want to emphasize the social context. Because, let's be honest, if we are in transition arenas, transition fora, most of the time the social dimension of sustainable development is disregarded. But before addressing this, maybe we need to have a kind of a helicopter view on what is happening. In fact, this is, excuses, but this is in French, but this is a graph where we make a distinction between those who are still advocating globalization and those who are saying, no, we need regionalization, meaning the continents in the world. And on the left, you see people who are focusing on the economic efficiency, and here you are people focusing on the solidarity issue. Now, for each of these four parts in the graph, you have a, typical, well-known author. And in fact, at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, we were looking to sustainable development. And Brundtland was really still thinking that we could, at the global level, with the help of technology, really put a focus on solidarity, but still at the global level. With the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, we could see, for example, in the fora in and around the OECD, that they were pushing for green economy. But if you read the texts, it's still at the global level, and it's really with a focus on economic efficiency. I think if we talk about circular economy, we will put it at a continental level, but still a focus on solidarity. And that brings me to only two, I don't have much more time, only two important issues regarding the social dimension. First, an article I've been writing in February, justice as a necessary prerequisite. We were discussing also before coffee break a bit about our social issues. But I really think that we don't discuss it well enough in depth, where we have in a multidisciplinary setting the real discussion. Let me give you one example. And this example is of utmost importance if you want in your network of transition, if you want, for example, the trade unions on board. How can transition towards a circular economy be streamlined with securing the welfare state represented by the social security system? Think about healthcare, think about pensions, and think about the basis for financing this system. That's an issue we didn't resolve yet. If just for your thoughts, think about the repair cafe and people help. Yeah, it's all right. But that is outside the economy financing the social security system. So we need really an in-depth discussion on that in order also to convince what I said, our colleagues of the trade unions. Second issue, if in the ideal situation we go to a growing circular economy, that is what you see here, then we will have less import from the global south, in particular developing countries. Hopefully less export to the global south, because we keep it in the circle. What is the solidarity then with developing countries and people in developing countries? Because we were used to say trade, not aid. Again, an issue we need to think about and to discuss. Okay, let's move to a more practical approach and a couple of recommendations we have been formulating in the report. And I think the first one will be some music to the ears of some asking questions just before coffee break, because the first one we have been putting to the trade unions is, do you know where the financial flows are going to? Are they going to the real economy we're looking for? I think the answer is no. We have been discussing with key stakeholders in the trade unions, and the answer is no. We don't know. It's kind of anonymous, these financial flows. And then the question was, are you ready to take on board, like 100 years ago again, part of the production and consumption, for example, in cooperatives? You can see it in other parts of the world, but that would mean that you pull out some money from the current economy and you put it in the economy you want. Second question, trade unions together with employers are governing the pension funds. It's about billions in our country. Why aren't they asking the questions where the investments are made with the pension funds? And can't they govern it in another way so that we put it again in the economy we want? Well, in my mind, this circular economy. A couple of examples of that. So what we're looking for in terms of recommendations is, yeah, for sure, classical production processes. We still need it. We still need some volume of production. That's for sure. But secondly, we need to think well and in depth about recycling processes, about maintenance and repair, but about refurbishment and reuse as well, and about dismantling. So that's for sure. And that's the reason why we have been putting some recommendations in our report. I will come to the first set later on, but also, for example, for public authorities. Taking into account these challenges and the urgency in terms of security of supply, why don't we have a Minister for Raw Materials, Energy and Spatial Planning? The report was published before our elections. Unfortunately, probably they didn't read the report. They take on board in the government the recommendation. It's with only the cheek I'm saying this. But the point is as well, why are we not really monitoring raw material flows in our country? Why are we not orienting research and development and engineering education towards design for scarcity, towards recycling for scarcity, for example? So we have really some issues on the table we need to look at. And for sure, for the longer term, for the midterm, maybe we need transition arenas. We need to scale it up. We need to stimulate product service systems. Yes, for sure. But we need to pay attention as well at the short term. From this report, discussed at a congress of the trade union where 400 representatives were present, they have concluded that they wanted to develop a vulnerability tool to be used in fact, by their representatives in the enterprise. And it's a tool regarding the supply of critical raw materials. We have made a distinction between three categories in the tool. It's a web-based tool, user-friendly. It's ready now. They are now still looking for how to host it, more technical issues, and how to do the design. But the tool is there. And in there we have made a distinction between three categories: the rare earth metals, the metals with a volume supply risk, and other critical materials. The basis for it, for sure, was inter alia the list published by the European Commission just before summertime. We have a couple of questions we are putting forward in terms of economy, supply, strategy, and innovation to try to see how vulnerable the enterprise is. And that would then be the result. Vulnerability 100% is outside. The red line is where the enterprise is standing in terms of the different issues we are putting forward. We have been linking it to legislation we have in Belgium where trade union representatives can demand, and I say not ask, but can demand for information, social and economic information. It's written in a royal decree from 73, and each of the questions we have been linking to the different parts of this royal decree, so that the trade union representative in the Works Council can put forward the questions, can point at the vulnerability of an enterprise, and by doing so, start a discussion with the employer at the other side of the table. We do think that this kind of vulnerability instrument has multiple objectives. Yes, indeed, for the interaction with the enterprise, but as well at the level, for example, of the local social and economic councils we have in our region, eventually even at the level of the subsector and even at the level of farmers, where you could set up a dialogue on this question on vulnerability, and from the analysis push towards this need for a circular economy within the context of sustainable development. I leave with you some references if the presentation will be forwarded to the participants, and